What's up, everybody?
This video is going to show you how to replace a basement exterior door by removing the existing door, waterproofing the cinder block, attaching the door frame to the cinder block, waterproofing your sill with caulk, setting the door in place, attaching your hinges, and finally how to shim the door so you have a nice clean reveal all the way across. With that said, let's get into the video. What's going on, guys? So on today's project, we're replacing this basement door. It's a 32-inch by 80-inch. And what I'm showing here is the existing condition. As you can see, the door jamb is pretty rotted out. The boards attached to the concrete are also pretty rotted. So I think I'm just gonna rip this whole thing out and start from scratch. So to remove everything, I started by pulling off the door, as you're seeing there. And then I went and grabbed my pry bar and just started ripping everything off piece by piece. So after pulling off the door jamb, I took another look at the frame that was attached to the cinder block, and it was just too rotted out. So I decided to pull everything off like I mentioned earlier. To do that, I used a pry bar, and the framing was attached to the cinder block with these masonry nails. And to remove those, I used a reciprocating saw with a metal blade and just cut those off, and then used a hammer to make sure there was nothing left that was protruding out further than the face of the cinder block. Next, I did a little bit of housekeeping, vacuumed everything up in preparation for installing the new door. So here's a look at the cinder block wall with everything removed, and there's my base slab, and now we can move on to waterproof flashing. So what I'm applying here is a flashing tape that's adhesive on one side, and I figured this would be a good idea to install to kind of put a barrier between the cinder block and the pressure treated lumber I'm going to be installing next. So I just used that tape, stuck it to the wall, and then made sure it went down far enough that it overlapped the bottom slab just a bit. I'm not 100% sure if this was a great idea, so let me know in the comments if you think this flashing is needed. Next, I measured the height for my pressure treated door casing, and typically this would be 2x4 pressure treated lumber, but I used 1x4 because the rough opening in the concrete cinder block didn't allow for anything bigger than a 1x4. Next, I checked to make sure everything was plumb and level, and then I used a rotary hammer to pre-drill my holes into the cinder block through the board. I did this in about 4 locations for each board, and then used a Tapcon masonry screw to attach the pressure-treated casing to the cinder block. Again, 4 per side, went down the line, used my rotary hammer, and then just make sure that your screws are recessed into the wood so they're not sticking out. Then I moved on to the other side and did the exact same thing. That is using the rotary hammer to pre-drill into the concrete, checking the level, and anchoring the pressure-treated lumber to the cinder block with Tapcon masonry screws. All of the tools and materials I used for this project will be linked in the description in case you want to check those out. So after confirming level, here's a look at the door frame attached to the cinder block. And don't worry about that excess flashing, we'll trim that off later. So as we prepare to install the new door, it's a good idea to remove any staples that might impact the installation, and then remove the chick plug, which keeps the door locked in place during transit, so you can open and step through the door when you get it in place. So here I am performing a preliminary dry fit, just to make sure it fit within the rough-in opening, and that everything was going to be smooth sailing down the road. So after confirming that everything looked good with the dry fit, I vacuumed the threshold area where the door was going to rest, and then I just confirmed that the slab was perfectly level where the door is going to sit. If it's not, you'll need to shim underneath, but fortunately in my case, everything was level. Next up, you're going to apply a ton of caulk sealant to the bottom of the slab where the door is going to rest. So in this sill area, they recommend that you install an entire tube of caulk just to make sure that the bottom there between the slab and the door sill is completely sealed. They also recommend that you put a bead of caulk along the bottom side of the door sill. Here's a look with everything in place. Sorry that the sealant is clear. They were out of any other colors at my local hardware store. With the sealant in place, you're gonna tip the door sideways and lift it into place, placing it on top of all the sealant, and then go ahead and extend it upright. And at this point, you can open the door, step through, and make your final adjustments, centering the door in between your opening, pushing it in place as you need, but just make sure everything is looking even and in place. Okay, so once we have our door in place, you can see we have our hinges. I pre-drilled all of the holes in the hinges just to make that easier. And because we have block so close, right? So again, reminder, we have our jamb right here, and we only have a 1x because our rough-in opening was very small, so that's the biggest thing we could put here. So for that reason, when I'm drilling through these, I'm having to use a hammer drill, and I'm going through the hinge, and I'm also going into the block because I need to use, unfortunately, a Tapcon screw to go through there and then into the block to actually secure this, because having a 1x, in my opinion, is not sufficient. So following that super awesome field explanation, you'll see here that I'm putting these Tapcon screws through the jamb and all the way through the block to make sure that we're fully secure and this door is never going to move later on. Next up, I installed some shims at each hinge location, and the idea there is just to set uniform spacing between the jamb and the 1x4 frame that we installed previously. Go ahead and tighten down the Tapcons, not fully, but just enough to hold it in place while you get everything adjusted and make sure that you have a uniform reveal all the way up. Use a level to make sure everything is plumb, check both front to back and left to right, and then continue to install shims until everything is looking uniform and consistent. Here I am moving up to the second hinge, and then I'm installing my final shim at the top before anchoring that with a Tapcon. Okay, so with our hinge side done, we'll move over to our lock side. So I'm gonna start at the bottom here, and I wanna have a nice clean reveal from the bottom all the way to the top. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a preliminary set screw in. I have my shims, and I have a reveal that I like. So we'll go ahead and put the screw in. So unlike the hinge side of the door where you actually install your anchor screws through the hinges, over here on the lock side, you're gonna need to pre-drill. I recommend that you pre-drill behind the weather stripping so that your screw is hidden, and then go ahead and insert the screws. At this stage again, do not fully tighten them, just insert the screws enough so you have it in place and you can make minor adjustments as you need to get a uniform reveal. Here at the actual deadbolt location, I wanted to go through into the cinder block, again, just to make sure that this door was fully secure. This is a situation that you'll need to do if you have to go directly in cinder block. Hopefully you have a 2x4 frame and you can just fasten it to that. So after going through the block, I used Tapcons and then anchored them behind the weather stripping. So after installing a few screws, I checked the reveal to see what kind of adjustments I was going to need to make. This is a pretty iterative process, so you're going to find that you're going to need to put more shims in, take some shims out, and tighten your screws, loosen your screws, etc. as needed to get that uniform reveal. But just basically keep double checking and you'll eventually get something you're happy with. Here I am making a minor adjustment, and I recommend that you put probably maybe three or four screws in. Usually it's recommended that you put one screw above the deadbolt and one below, just to make sure that the door can't be kicked in very easily. But again, I'm just using shims, double checking everything, and it's really just as simple as using a level, making sure you're plumb, and then making sure that your reveal looks good. Here's a close-up of me showing how I'm using a Tapcon behind the weather stripping and going through both the jamb and then the 1x4 casing that we installed, and then all the way into the cinder block. Once I was happy with everything and got a consistent reveal from top to bottom, it was time to install the door hardware. So as I put this door hardware on, if you haven't done so already, please drop a like on the video and subscribe if you like content like this. It really helps out the channel. Closes, deadbolt. Okay, perfect. So after testing the door and confirming that no more adjustments were needed, I cut off the excess shims using a oscillating tool. If you have a lot of shims, like 2 in a row, an oscillating tool is your best bet, but if you just have one, you can score it with a utility knife and then just snap it off. Now, if you're using a door like mine, there are these little plugs that you install that go over the screws. You can do that now. It's pretty simple. You just push them in place. And then what I'm showing here is that I'm using expandable spray foam in between the gap between the jamb and the frame that was installed previously. Excuse the shakes, I was trying to hold the camera. And then once it dries, you go back with a utility knife and just cut off any excess. Now, moving on to the outside, what you're going to do is caulk the gap between your brick mold and the cinder block or your house wrap, whatever your situation is. There's a quick look. As you can see, I still need to do some painting, which I'll do later on. But aside from some painting and installing the casing on the inside, I basically just installed the rest of my LVP flooring. I'll be publishing a full video on the flooring at a later date, so subscribe if you want to see that. And after confirming that the door closed perfectly, I went ahead and caulked the gap between the threshold and the floor. And at this point, this door project is basically complete. So thank you guys so much for watching. As you can see, there's still a little bit of work to be done. I need to put the trim on the inside and do some painting on the outside, but I'm in the process of remodeling this entire basement. So if that's something you're interested in, feel free to check out the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you.